But like we were saying, most of the things are pretty non-consequential. Like the government legally recognizing only two genders, like that's just like you were saying. That's just meant to divide. It's just meant to militarize his own base and make them feel like he's doing something for them when really he
Yeah.
isn't doing anything that's going to impact them in any positive way. So you just have to do things that like get them riled up. So
Yeah, Jeannie has this
that's a
saying.
distraction, like they've all been saying.
It is.
Go ahead.
Jeannie has this saying, which is like, and she's very true. But Republicans, they
Hmm.
show, right? So what they do is,
Hmm.
they say something, and Democrats don't say anything, right? So that's the Republicans. The thing is like Republicans, for example, we have Democrats, we believe certain things, but we don't really, you know, we don't stick to divisiveness issues. And because I think as Democrats and progressive, our focus is mostly on coming together. But when you have that
Hmm.
undertone all the time, it seems like you don't believe in anything. And that's what, most people, I think that's what's wrong with our messaging in the party. It's just like, it's like Bernie doesn't have that problem. Bernie, like, he has his four issues. He's gonna say it over and over. He has great messaging. But the rest of the Democrat Party has terrible
Yeah.
messaging, right? It just seems like we don't believe anything because we just keep saying a whole bunch of stuff that we're not coalescing around an idea. And Trump is, and that is the power of Trump, because Trump coalesces around an idea, and people can understand that idea.
Hmm.
And so, what once again, like what Jenny says, is like Republicans show and Democrats don't say much. And what I believe that means is Republicans stay on message, they communicate the same idea over and over, and Democrats would tend to try to get everyone on the boat. It's like, hey, we,
I think that I think that it's an interesting point that well, I think that Republicans are more consistent to their own values.
yeah,
I think that's the thing is they're more representative of now they are selling out, but that's not something they're opposed to. That's the thing.
yeah,
So the fact that they're controlled by donor classes and by big business and all these special interests,
hmm,
it comes across as more genuine than the Democrats
yeah,
because the Democrats are doing it, but like they're making concessions to their own message because
hmm,
it's less electorally viable. Republicans basically do whatever the fuck they want, and their voters will support them.
yeah,
The Democrats come across as disingenuous because they have certain values, but they have such a broader tent of people they're trying to please,
hmm,
from their own voter base to the donor base to the perceived independents and moderates that are supposed to be swinging back and forth in between
yeah,
elections. So Democrats have just such a monotone message, a general vague, like universal health care instead of like actually subsets of
yeah,
policies, which I don't know that the voter base necessarily wants a list of policies as much as they want like a vision, which Republicans will offer. It's easier to offer a vision as a Republican because it's just like, think in the past. What's the time that you liked? We want it to be like that, and you don't have to have any sort of basis in reality. All you have to promise is to create stagnancy. All you have to
yeah,
promise is to like prevent Democrats from improving or changing anything, and then it's appeasing the values of the conservative. It's so easy to come across as genuine when you don't promise anything at all.
yeah.
So that's the problem. We have a bigger it's a bigger ask for us to be completely honest about what we're trying to do and appeal to a broad base of misinformed voters.
Yeah, it is. And so I take the executive orders as a big propaganda day about, staying focused on the one issues, which is the majority of the executive orders have to deal with immigration. So he kind of like doubled down on immigration is the root cause of all our problems, and immigration is going to be fixed under me, and I'm going to pass all these executive orders. Like I said, the one that I saw had more teeth was the ending of birthright citizenship. As you said, Seth, that's kind of probably going to get struck down by the Supreme Court. Uh, but
Yeah.
it takes a
It
while.
does. It does say in the Constitution,
Hmm?
right?
Yeah, it takes a
It
while.
does talk about anyway.
What were you saying, Seth?
Oh, I was just saying it does say in the Constitution that like any citizen born in the United States at some point, I remember seeing that. I can't cite it like a Bible verse, but
Yeah, you're right. You're as
anyway.
long as you're born on your soil, you're an American citizen. That's true. I guess their position is like, well, it was the intent of the case that interpreted that Constitution, the 14th Amendment, essentially was really geared towards ending slavery and giving slaves the right, you know, human rights essentially.
Mhm.
And obviously it was due to the Civil War, but their positioning on their executive order is really talking about, well, that was correct, that interpretation, but the interpretation was still too broad because it allowed Mexicans and anyone using the fact that their child was born here, which is predominantly Mexicans, that's why I said Mexican, uh, essentially now automatically has rights as an American citizen. Now, so that's their position. They're saying, well, the Supreme Court went too far and it should be more narrow as it applies to slavery, yes, but as it applies to anyone else, no. So if you, they listed like three criteria. If you were
Yeah.
yeah, if you were like a nationalized citizen, got a child, your father was the father of that child, um, was wasn't had no status in the country, and I guess the child is no longer a citizen. I don't know. It sounds ridiculous because it's like technically you can't even ban laws that you can't take someone's right away. It's called an ex post facto law that was legal at the time. So I don't even know how the law even goes into effect. I don't even know how the law goes into effect in the future because the executive order essentially is kind of taking what is, and I'm sorry, I'm put a lawyer hat on for a second. The executive order is essentially taking someone's rights from being a citizen. So you have all these people, technically, if this executive order were to be upheld, are essentially no longer citizens of America, but they're not illegal, right? And they're
Yeah.
not, they have no legal status at all. So you literally have, they're just like people just in this country who were born who falls into one of these criterias who are not who are no longer quote unquote citizens are in limbo state. That's why I don't think that's why I believe that the executive order is going to get struck down because it doesn't make any sense. It's like if they're not citizens, they're not illegal, and they have no legal status. What are they?
Yeah.
And that's what.
And I don't think
Hmm?
I was gonna say I don't think that many of the Trump policies are very well thought out,
Yeah, they're not thought about at
nor
all.
do they really really care about the consequences. It's more about like I don't care. I want to live in a white country. And they don't really care about, because obviously they don't care about the people who suffer from the consequences. So they don't really care about thinking it through. They just think that less white people, it'll be better. Because, in the 50s, things were great. Oh, you've seen all those fancy pictures of the white family in a diner. Oh, if only we could go back to those days. That's the aesthetic that they're just envisioning of a great time of prosperity.
Yeah,
And it's just not an accurate, depiction of what the United States looked like. It's just a fantasy. You know,
but the United States
it's
had
easier to pin their problems on. Go ahead. Go ahead.
no. You're right. It just depends upon a group of people. Yeah, I mean, you're 100%
Yeah.
right. I mean, in 1950 America, we're only this this thing. America is a great country, but circumstances matter. We came out for World War II, being the dominant country, not the only dominant country, but British and a lot of the European powers. After being Hitler, were allowed to rewrite the map of the world. and they rewrote it
pretty
in a
much.
way that gave America dominance and they gave Europeans dominance, which, I can't, it's to my benefit as an American that we did that. But at the same time, let's not make it seem like the 1950s was great because the war didn't play a fact. The war was a huge factor in that. And that war was fought with not just white Americans, it was fought with Italian Americans, black Americans, it was fought with a lot of Americans. So to be under this idea that the white America established greatness of America, it's BS. The
Hmm.
American greatness came from us winning a war, rewriting the map of the world, and giving ourselves dominance. But that war was only won through the diversity of America. And
Yeah, I mean the entirety of the United States was essentially built off of non-white people
yeah,
through exploitation, and then white people writing the history books,
yeah,
essentially creating the narrative, setting the standard of how things are interpreted and who gets credit for what accomplishments. If they were, it's always the person at the top who gets to
yeah,
decide that stuff, and the person at the top is very rarely there because of a meritocracy. It's more because of an existing power that they inherited, or in some way, or gained privilege in some semblance. So it's like throughout history, it's hard to even know what reality
yeah,
is, because it's understandable how the Trump people started off with this fake news. Everything's fake news, and they just confuse themselves into a world of rabbit holes because of just if you go the opposite of what the news is telling you, you can kind of create your own reality and
yeah,
any sort of existence and sort of facet of possibility becomes a
yep,
reality. Just if you believe it could be so, it's
yeah,
so. And they just don't even really have any sort of way to base reality on
mhm,
facts. So when you present facts, it kind of does not matter at all. Because when you're convinced that the facts are created by powerful people, which in a sense they are, then you kind of believe just confirmation. And that's the majority of Americans at this point, clearly, because the majority of Americans voted for Trump. So they live in an alternative reality in which Biden is some corrupt, evil inflation creator, war mongering. I don't know. He did some stuff, some
mhm,
questionable choices, but in no reality is he more of a threat to Americans than Donald Trump. Nor was Kamala Harris, obviously.
yeah. I agree with you. I mean, I just believe that, you know, white America built America too. I'm not gonna ever sit there and say white America didn't build America. Just like blacks and Latinos and everybody built America. But what I'm saying is there are certain things that, we need one race needs to stop taking the credit for. America's always been great
Yeah.
because of our diversity. And our diversity of ideas, our diversity of our culture is what make America unique from any other group of people in the world. And that's why we're the free leaders of the world. But, you know, we have to understand that the focus, and I think Bernie is trying to do this now, if you look at his latest campaigns, the focus that people don't understand is, and this has always been the war, is it's always going to be the haves and the have-nots war. That's just what it is. It's never been a war about white and black. It's always been about who can have it and who cannot have it. And for a very long time, it always was the blacks can't have it. And then it started changing that women can't have it. And then it changed from blacks, women, now black women can't have it. Now it changed to say that even white men, white women can't have it. And then so what we've turned our society into is always going to be the haves and have not. And right now, Trump supporters are the have nots, thinking that they're the haves, thinking that Trump is going to give me something that I have never been able to achieve in America or my parents can achieve as a white person, because I believe that
Yeah.
diversity is the DEI program that was created has stopped me from being who I need to be, or some other program has stopped me from being what I need to be. But the reality is, you were never going to be what you wanted to be because the system is not made for poor white people or black people or Latino people. It's made for rich European descended people. And that's the conversation we don't want to have.
and and I know it's ultimately like a cringe way to describe it, but it's the more I've been thinking about it, it's the most accurate word. Is it's not about power or freedom necessarily. It's privilege. They're Americans, Republican Americans specifically. Conservatism is always just a projection of their own fears. They're concerned about welfare queens and people living off the system when it's really they're afraid of somebody having something that they have, which is white people have a certain standard, a certain guaranteed amount of success because of privilege, because of a certain standard that they have above minority people. So when they're afraid of you know, a lazy subset of society, they're more worried that it's not going to be them. That's really what they're projecting their fears on. It's it's just they have no sense of responsibility, so you kind of deflect that onto the weaker group that they perceive. People like my father, who is currently unemployed.
Yeah.
I swear he lost his job like a month or
Yeah.
two ago, and I think he's just waiting around for Trump to be in office because for some reason in the back of his mind he's convinced that Trump's going to sign these executive orders and all of a sudden jobs are just going to
Yeah.
free up. Like I legitimately think that that's a belief of millions of people. They think that that Trump's got something that up his sleeve that nobody really else knows about. He's just going to boom one day. There's a million new jobs and they're all well paying because they got rid of all those leeches on the system.
Yeah, and that
When in reality it was always them that there were leeches.
yeah, and so that's what happens when you have leaders who takes an opportunity and takes because Trump is not I don't think Trump's a rocket scientist. He's smart, but he's not a rocket scientist. He
No,
understands that in order to gain real power, you have to divide the people. That's how you gain power. And he understands that. He's a
yeah.
Machiavellian.
Or at least you have to have an. It's not as much about dividing as much as it is about having an enemy or somebody to pin your
Of
problems on,
course, yeah,
somebody to
yeah.
deflect blame of everything. Even when you're unsuccessful, it has to be somebody else's problem so that they maintain their faith in
Exactly.
you.
So that's a very Machiavellian approach to power. And that is his game. That's his end game. That's what he knows. And so he doubles down on his playbook. And the reality is, all it does is hurt the country in the long run. Because at the end of the day, you spent 8 years, or no, this time 12 years, essentially stating that the problem is not the way our government is structured. The problem is not the way that our economics is structured. It's not the way that the system is constructed to not allow people to rise up from within their set of problems. And we, instead of understanding that systematically America is at the worst place it's ever been in terms of the system being broken, we don't address that issue and we make the issue simply an issue of diversity. Instead of saying that the system is broken, we're saying, well, this sensitive group of people is causing problem on the system because the system is fine. America's great. Let's bring America back to the way it
Yeah,
was because the system is working, right? It's just these group of people that
yeah,
is not allowing the system to function the way it's supposed to function. And that's a lie. That's a fallacy because the system in itself is broken. Because right now, this is the most tech oligarchs, that's the words they've been using lately. This
yeah,
is the richest set of subgroup of people who just picked the next president. They literally just the last time this happened, I watched the historic documentary about the last time oligarchs picked the president. I think it was who's the guy?
was in the 20s.
It was in the 20s.
Is it Warren G. Harding or
I think it was Warren G. Harding's. Yes. So it was a lot. It was the railroad. God, what's this guy's name? Famous.
Rockefeller,
Rockefeller, and there was another one. There's like three of them. I
uh,
think Rockefeller, J.P.
yeah,
Morgan, and
Vanderbilt or
the
something.
Vanderbilt. Yeah, so those three they picked the next president, and that was the last time that's ever happened. That was over 100 years ago,
Yeah,
and so now we just had that
I
happen.
mean, you could argue it happened with Ronald Reagan too. You could even argue it happened with George W. Bush too. There's an argument
I
for
think
that
Reagan and Bush
because
had
Reagan, I
more of
mean,
a
Reagan was.
second.
Yeah, I was gonna say that they have their own charm or whatever, or their own public sphere
Yeah,
because one was an actor and one was the president's son,
yeah,
but they were still used for their fame to just deliver whatever the corporate world wanted in the presidency because they were neither of them were ideological people. Reagan was just sort of
mm-hmm.
like, I'm a Christian, so now I go along with whatever conservatives tell me and I'll do whatever they tell me because I have dementia. And George H.W. Bush never really cared that much of either. He was just following his father's footsteps,
Yeah,
and he picked Dick Cheney to help him out and pick staffers. Then you know, from there on, Dick Cheney represented
big
big
corporate.
business
Yeah,
in the purest form. He was the executive of, was it Halliburton or something,
yeah,
or am I thinking of
Halliburton.
that sounds right?
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he literally was an executive put directly into the presidency, the executive office, just like Elon Musk.
mm-hmm.
They just come in different forms. And that's, I mean, like I said, yes, and Harding in his purest form was also picked, but I think that Trump is also pretty akin to Reagan or W. Bush because he's just picked for his celebrity.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but it is a unique, different position because he isn't purely picked for the business world. He was picked by the American people because of his ability to
I
speak
think the
on
business.
racial issues in their.
You talking about Trump?
Go ahead. Yeah,
I think the business world
because
definitely
Trump
helped
is.
him out.
Yeah, no, they definitely. That's what I'm saying. They definitely helped him out,
Mhm.
but I do think he's more unique because he did genuinely strike some sort of racial tension chord in red America,
It-
and I think that that's why he comes across as a little bit less controlled than W. Bush or whatever because he just does his own shit. He's more of a renegade, but he's also not ideological enough to not be influenced by the business world, by the corporate elites, which is what happened with Elon Musk. He didn't really have a personal, you know,
Yeah,
atmosphere telling him not to just completely let Elon Musk buy the presidency from him.
yeah.
You know,
No, I think
it's a
you're
little
right.
bit different.
I think you're right. He does have. Listen, I always say Trump is a businessman, and he's always going to follow what makes sense business wise. That's who he is, and
Okay.
obviously that's doesn't make a good president because we want our president to understand social issues just as much as business issues. But I think that what happens with Trump is he tends to think of everything as a business issue. If and he's the problem with business people, and even I fall for it at times. It's a competition. It's in our nature. You're gonna want to always do whatever you can to stay on top, or be relevant, or start to be you know um, better than you were yesterday. And the problem with that mentality in the White House is you're not thinking about how to connect the country, you know, and that's the problem. Because what happens when you don't want to connect the country, you start to do things like DEI and other things like that that tax a group of people. And the problem with that is once you start attacking other people, eventually it's like someone who gets punched in the face. Eventually they're gonna punch back. And when they do punch
Yeah.
back, that's when the civil war happens in the country. Because you think as much as we gotta look at who we're attacking. We're attacking white women with an abortion ban. We're
Yeah.
attacking African American men and women under DEI. We're attacking Latinos under DEI. You're immigrating moms, dads of Mexican families and many Latin communities. So what do you think is going to happen? these people are going to get tireless. They're going to get restless, and that's how civil war starts. And it's not going to be a civil war
Yeah, or at
from the
least I'll have to say sorry for yawning.
Yeah,
Or at least like a severe political opposition, like something that they can't ever get back. Like they think that preserving the white majority is going to, protect conservatism or something like that, because ultimately they're afraid of, other immigrants who don't value freedom in the same way or share different values. Because ultimately the conservative base is an ever growing or ever shrinking base because inherently they stand for unpopular positions and you know represent the business interests that are directly opposed to the working class. Pretty much anybody that has a job is going to be worse off with Republicans, so they have to they can't win over voters, so it's easier to get rid of the other voters. That's ultimately what this mass deportation thing's about. They are under the delusion that somehow Democrats have been winning because they've been cheating, and that because non-white people don't like Republicans, that they're tricking non-white people into, or yeah, like illegal immigrants into voting or whatever. They're bribing them. Whatever they think is happening, I think is going to be solved by this mass deportation. But what's really happening is they're creating dissidents. They're creating opposition and people that are going to hate conservatism and Republican values for forever and actually care about them. Because right now, like we've said, this is not a problem of more voters like Trump than Kamala. It was ultimately people who showed up to vote. And a lot of people were so uninspired by the Democratic message, or at least what they perceived as the Democratic message, and opposed to Trump, or at least the inconsistency of it.
yeah,
They just didn't show up to vote. That's why the most votes happened last electoral cycle. Before that was because everybody could just stay home and vote from their house. Just getting people out to spend part of their day voting
yeah.
when they're one of 120 million people.
Hmm.
It's very, doesn't seem like you're doing anything. It kind of feels like a waste of time to a lot of people, especially because of the electoral college and your vote essentially not counted for anything. So ultimately, this is the kind of thing that genuinely is going to boomerang back and backfire against Republicans, because America is a shrinking white majority. Like the white majority is shrinking, and the more and more that is the message, is preserving a white majority through immigration, all this stuff, the less and less they're going to have that in the long term as a thing to run against or run on, and it's going to taint the Republican image to all these new voters and all these people who are recently actually inspired to do something against the government who is taking away their rights. Like it's something, it's going to be hard to hide the
Yeah.
Republicans taking away their rights in front of their eyes.
So there was a guy. He does this podcast. Um, it's kind of like Joe Rogan, but it's not really Joe Rogan. He's like Iranian descent. I think it's called PvP podcast, something like that.
Oh yeah, yeah, Patrick Bet David or
Yeah,
whatever.
Patrick Bet David. He had this segment where he talked about he was like, "Oh yeah, Trump man, I'm excited about him being inaugurated." And I guess he referenced some kind of American theme. I don't know what it was. Like I think it was a song or something. Uh, and then someone chimed in. It was a white man, pure MAGA, and he was like, you know, you're not from America. You shouldn't be singing our songs or whatever thing he said. And Patrick,
Yeah,
you said Patrick, what's his name? Patrick Davis, something like that.
Bet Bet David.
Basically,
Yeah,
yeah, he was just saying like he was shocked because he's like Trump's biggest supporter, and his MAGA supporters were like telling him to go back to Iran because he's not from this country, right? And he is truly is.
yeah.
He's a
Did you
big.
remember seeing that one?
Go ahead.
I was just seeing. Did you see that one video from a couple years back? Maybe it wasn't that long ago. It was Vivek Ramaswamy talking to Ann Coulter.
Yeah,
It was an interview, and she was like, I don't know. She was they were talking about this and that. She's like, "Oh, you're very energetic, and you come across as intelligent." Then she said something really overtly derogatory towards black people or whatever.
yeah.
I can't remember the context, but and then
Hmm.
right after that, she was like, "Well." I wouldn't vote for you because you're an Indian, but and then that was just how
I
it ended. And
remember
he was
that.
just like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I remember that.
And it's like
And he stood in the Republican Party.
she didn't even she didn't even do the normal like conservative thing and say like, oh, it's because you're not a Christian, you're a Hindu or whatever. No, it's because you're an Indian. She said.
Yeah.
Okay, so because he's not white, literally, and she's been such a prominent figure, Fox News and all the. It's just like all really, really getting hard to deny that Republicans are a white nationalist party. Like I don't know how people can
Yeah.
pretend that they aren't. Like almost
But the
all the
problem
national
that
figures have this white nationalist ideology.
but that's what I'm saying. The rhetoric is getting too much. Like I'm watching this thing on Congress. We have this black, I think she's like from Texas or something, where she's like a black congresswoman. And she's like going back and forth with the
Jasmine
white
Crockett,
congresswoman. Yeah, James
is it
Scott.
Jasmine Crockett?
What's her name? Jasmine Crockett. Yeah,
Jasmine Crockett.
it's Jasmine Crockett, right? Yeah. So she's going against this white, I guess MAGA Republican white woman, and they're like the white MAGA woman. I can't think of her name. Told this
Is it Marjorie
this
Taylor Greene?
what's her name?
Was it not Marjorie Taylor Greene?
No, it was another one. I know. I remember that spat between the two of them, but it
Was
was
it Lauren
another one.
Boebert? It's usually one or the other.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't
And
remember. She wasn't the big MAGA person. She was like a low level one.
oh, one
Like
of
I
low
think I
level.
look the low level MAGA. No, so because I don't know her name, so that's why she's low level. But
Sure.
but she's literally threatened to just like, hey, she threatened to go outside to go fight this woman as a congresswoman, and I'm like, you're doing this. You're what I see is MAGA, which is about 35% of Trump's base. They're trying to create the system where it's like, if you're not white, you're not good enough, right? But in the same time, Trump is trying to say, in the same breath, it's supposed to be a merit-based system, right? And
Yeah.
it's like your camps are not lining up because if MAGA's it wants to be
Yeah. No, you never cared about merit.
hmm?
That's always been a lie. That's always meant you're not in the right racial class
You're not.
because it's always been racial classism. Really,
But
what it is. It's the tier of you're a white person, then you're like maybe a black
well,
American
let's say
or
white.
maybe a
Okay, so
Latino American, and then a black non-American is the lower tier, and then keeps going down until they're
yeah,
a gay, queer, black, you know,
yeah, just
Muslim or whatever. You know what I mean? All the things that they hate at the very bottom.
yeah, and to me, it's when you see that, it's just you see the divide there, and the problem is, someone said this, and it's very true, but history always repeats itself. When you look at the Roman Empire, right, at its great days, you know, leading, it was like it was the number one country in the world, and it split into two. It split into the East Roman Empire and the West, which is pretty much, and it's a long story, but short. But essentially, the East was Orthodox Christians, and the West were just traditional Christians. And what happened was the Roman it collapsed because of these two ideologies, and these people couldn't work together for the
Mhm.
great good of Rome. And I see America, we're doing the same thing. We're East, West, Democrat, Republican, and Republicans
Yeah.
are saying we can't work with them because we don't believe that they're on our level and they should only be white people. And then you're creating a subgroup. So what happens? Country collapse again. Because what happens is now you have white people on one corner, which is about 50, no, that's probably not the most accurate number, but it was 60%, probably it's like 50% white dominant country now, right? And then you have 40% of minorities or 43 or 44% minorities in this camp. And so what you're having now is you're having this essentially culture wars and all these wars among each other. It's to the point now you're going to have this country's going to split. And I think a lot of people think that, oh, it's not true. The countries we're strong as we always will always be. But the reality is that's a fallacy because every country thinks they're going to stay the same. And the reality is when you have someone elected like Trump and people in his MAGA base speaking what they're speaking, you're creating two countries. Because reality is one side of the country believes in white dominance, the other side of the country believes in diversity. And now we're